My son told me I was the source of his stress, the root of all his tension, the reason he couldn't relax in his own home. He said it to me, his mother, as I stood at his stove, stirring a pot of the stew his children adored, the one I'd been making for them twice a week since his wife, Jessica, decided her burgeoning career as a lifestyle influencer left no time for such mundane domesticities. He said it while I was surrounded by the evidence of my daily, unpaid, unacknowledged labor, the freshly laundered school uniforms draped over the chairs, the neatly stacked homework assignments I'd just helped my granddaughter decipher, the subtle scent of lemon polish still lingering from my morning's work on his gleaming, influencer-worthy countertops. They thought my quiet diligence, my willingness to fill the ever-widening gaps in their chaotic, self-absorbed lives, was an endlessly renewable resource, a tap they could turn on and off at their convenience. They mistook my love for servitude, my patience for passivity. They didn't see the weariness in my eyes, the growing ache in my back, the slow, steady erosion of my own spirit as I poured myself into their endless needs. But that day, as his words, so casually cruel, so profoundly ungrateful, hung in the air between us, something inside me, something I thought had long been extinguished, flickered back to life. Not with a roar, but with a quiet, steely resolve. They thought I was just the help, the live-in, unpaid nanny, cook, and housekeeper. They were about to discover that even the quietest cog in their well-oiled machine of convenience could, when sufficiently provoked, bring the entire damn contraption grinding to a halt. My name is Eleanor, and this is how I stopped being their solution and started being my own. The arrangement hadn't started this way, not exactly. When my son, Michael, and his wife, Jessica, first asked me to move in with them 3 years ago, it was framed as a mutually beneficial situation. I'd recently lost my own dear Harold, my husband of 45 years, and the silence in our small, empty nest was a heavy shroud. Michael, ever the pragmatist, had painted a picture of familial bliss and practical support. "Mom," he'd said, his voice filled with that earnest concern he could muster so effectively, "the house is too big for you now. And Jessica and I, with our careers, the kids, we could really use your help. It would be wonderful for Leo and Mia to have their grandma around full-time. And you wouldn't be lonely." Lonely. That was the word that had hooked me. The thought of being surrounded by family, by the laughter of my grandchildren, of feeling needed, useful again, was a powerful lure. Jessica, at the time, had been all smiles and enthusiastic agreement. "Oh, Eleanor, it would be a dream," she'd gushed, her eyes sparkling, with sincerity. I'd thought then, with something else entirely, I realized later. "We have that lovely guest suite downstairs, with its own bathroom. You'd have your privacy, of course. And just think, no more worrying about yard work or leaky faucets." I sold my little house, the one Harold and I had poured our hearts into, and moved into their sprawling, modern, and somewhat sterile suburban home. The guest suite was pleasant enough, though smaller than I'd anticipated, and a little isolated from the main hubbub of the family. But I was determined to make the best of it, to be a help, not a hindrance. In the beginning, it was almost as Michael had described. I'd help with the children in the mornings, getting them ready for school, packing their lunches. I'd do a bit of light housekeeping, start dinner before Jessica got home from her then part-time job at a local boutique. Jessica was launching her lifestyle brand online, a vague collection of aesthetically pleasing photos, aspirational quotes, and links to expensive organic cotton clothing. It seemed like a hobby then, something to fill her time. But as her online following grew, so did her ambition, and, it seemed, her disengagement from the actual, unglamorous realities of running a household and raising children. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, my role began to shift. Light housekeeping morphed into full-time, unpaid domestic service. I was doing all the laundry, all the grocery shopping, all the cleaning. Jessica, now a full-time content creator, spent her days curating her online persona, her perfectly filtered life a stark contrast to the increasingly chaotic reality I was managing behind the scenes. She'd emerge from her home office, formerly the actual guest bedroom, in the late afternoon, often dressed in immaculate loungewear, to take a few artfully staged photos of the dinner I had cooked, captioning them with something like, "Whipping up a quick, healthy meal for my precious family. #blessed #momboss #homemaker chic." the irony was apparently lost on her. Michael, caught between his demanding job and Jessica's burgeoning career, seemed to retreat further into himself, his interactions with me becoming increasingly perfunctory. He'd offer a distracted thanks, Mom, as I served him his dinner, his eyes already glued to his phone, scrolling through work emails or, more likely, Jessica's latest perfectly curated Instagram post. Leo and Mia, my grandchildren, were my only real solace. I cherished our time together, helping them with their homework, reading them bedtime stories, listening to their playground triumphs and tribulations. But even that began to feel managed. Jessica would often interrupt our quiet moments, phone in hand, to stage a candid family photo for her feed, a fleeting performance of domestic bliss before she retreated back to her digital world. The stress, I knew, was taking its toll on Michael. He looked perpetually tired, his brow furrowed, his temper shorter than it used to be. But I'd never imagined, not in my wildest dreams, that he would turn that stress, that frustration, onto me, the one person who was quietly, consistently, trying to hold their chaotic world together. Until that afternoon, standing at his stove, the aroma of beef stew, his favorite, filling the air, and his words, like a sudden, unexpected slap, shattering the fragile piece of my carefully constructed denial. You know, Mom, he'd said, his voice tight, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond my shoulder, sometimes, I think you're the reason I'm so stressed all the time. His words hung in the air, thick and acrid, like the smell of something burning. I stopped stirring the stew, my hand frozen mid-motion, the ladle clutched in a suddenly nerveless grip. I beg your pardon, Michael? I stammered, my mind struggling to process the casual cruelty of his accusation. He sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation of a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, a gesture I recognized from his boyhood, one that always signaled he was about to say something he knew was wrong, but was determined to say anyway. It's just, you're always here, Mom, he continued, finally deigning to look at me, though his gaze was unfocused, almost accusatory. Always, around. Hovering. It's like I can't breathe sometimes. Jessica feels it too. We never have any privacy, any space to just be ourselves, as a family. My jaw, I realized, was hanging slightly ajar. I closed it with a snap. I am always here, Michael, I said, my voice dangerously quiet, because you asked me to be here. Because your wife, who is currently upstairs curating content for her thousands of adoring fans, has effectively abdicated all responsibility for the running of this household and the care of her own children. I am hovering, as you so charmingly put it, because if I didn't, your children would likely go to school in unwashed uniforms and subsist on a diet of cereal and takeout. His face flushed a dull, angry red. That's not fair, Mom. Jessica works incredibly hard. Her brand is taking off. It's a real business. Oh, I'm sure it is, I said, my voice dripping with an irony I didn't bother to conceal. A business that apparently requires her to photograph the meals I cook as if they were her own culinary triumphs, while simultaneously complaining that the scent of onions interferes with her creative process. A business that allows her to spend hours locked in her office, while her children are downstairs asking their hovering grandmother to help them with their fractions. You just don't understand. Michael exploded, his voice rising. You're from a different generation. You don't get the pressures we're under, the demands of modern life, of building a career, a brand. A different generation? I echoed, my own anger, long suppressed, finally beginning to simmer. Yes, Michael, I am from a generation that understood the meaning of responsibility, of commitment, of putting your family's needs before your own fleeting ambitions. I am from a generation that knew how to cook a meal, clean a house, and raise children without needing an online audience to validate our existence. See? This is what I mean, he gestured wildly, his face contorted. This constant judgment. This disapproval. It's suffocating. No wonder I'm stressed. It's you, Mom. You're the one creating all this tension in the house. The injustice of it, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of his blaming me for the chaos they themselves had created, was like a physical blow. I felt a wave of dizziness, a sudden, overwhelming weariness. I had poured my life, my energy, my love, into this family, and in return, I was being branded as the source of their stress, a burden, an impediment to their perfect, influencer-worthy lives. Jessica chose that moment to make her grand entrance, wafting into the kitchen in a cloud of expensive perfume and a silk kaftan that probably cost more than my entire monthly pension. She took in the scene, Michael red-faced and agitated, me pale and trembling, and her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arched in an expression of mild, detached concern. "Everything all right, darlings?" she asked, her voice a silken purr. "Michael was just explaining to me, Jessica," I said, my voice tight with a mixture of fury and a profound, heart-wrenching sorrow, "how my very presence in this house, the house where I cook his meals, launder his clothes, and care for his children, is the primary source of his stress." Jessica's eyes flickered towards Michael, a silent, almost imperceptible exchange passing between them. Then, she turned back to me, her expression softening into one of pitying condescension. "Oh, Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "I think perhaps you're being a little oversensitive. Michael is just under a lot of pressure at work. We all are. And sometimes, when people are stressed, they say things they don't entirely mean." "Oh, I think he meant it, Jessica," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I think he meant every single, ungrateful, disrespectful word." The aroma of the stew, once so comforting, now seemed cloying, unbearable. I reached out and turned off the burner, the click of the knob a small, decisive sound in the suddenly charged silence. "Well," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "if I am indeed the source of all this tension, then perhaps it's time I removed myself from the equation." I untied my apron, the familiar floral pattern suddenly feeling like a costume I had worn for far too long, and laid it carefully on the counter. "Dinner," I announced, my voice devoid of its usual warmth, "is on its own tonight. As, I suspect, are the two of you, from this moment forward." And with that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of their carefully curated, profoundly dysfunctional lives, leaving them standing amidst the wreckage of their own making, the scent of simmering resentment, and a stew that would, I had a feeling, remain uneaten. The decision to leave, once made, felt less like a dramatic upheaval and more like the shedding of a heavy, ill-fitting coat I hadn't realized I'd been wearing for 3 long years. I didn't storm out in a blaze of fury, my departure was as quiet and methodical as my years of service in their home had been. That evening, while Michael and Jessica presumably navigated the unfamiliar territory of preparing their own dinner and supervising their children's bedtime routine, a task I suspected would involve a great deal of takeout and a significant amount of screen time, I retreated to my guest suite and began to pack. Not everything, just the essentials, a few changes of clothes, my toiletries, the small, treasured box of Harold's letters, and the faded photograph of him that had been my constant companion through so many lonely nights. I had a small emergency fund, a little nest egg I'd carefully guarded from my old house sale, money I'd earmarked for a rainy day. Well, it was pouring. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, before the chaos of school runs and influencer-worthy breakfast smoothie preparations began, I called a taxi. As I waited on the curb, my 2 small suitcases beside me, I felt a strange mixture of trepidation and a surprising, exhilarating sense of liberation. I had no concrete plan, no clear destination beyond a vague notion of finding a small, temporary lodging, perhaps a modest extended-stay hotel, while I figured out my next steps. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was in control of my own movements, my own decisions. My first call, once I was settled into a surprisingly cheerful, if Spartan, hotel room, was to my old friend, Margaret Holloway. Margaret, a retired schoolteacher with a mind as sharp as a tack and a heart as warm as a summer's day, had been my confidante for over 50 years. She listened to my story, her initial shock quickly giving way to a righteous indignation on my behalf. "Eleanor, you poor dear," she exclaimed, her voice crackling with outrage. "The unmitigated gall of that boy. And that influencer wife of his. Stress? You're the reason for his stress? I've never heard such poppycock in all my born days." Her outrage was a balm to my bruised spirit. "What are you going to do, Eleanor?" she asked, her voice softening with concern. I don't know, Margaret, I admitted. I truly don't. I feel adrift. Nonsense, Margaret said firmly. You're not adrift, you're just between ports. Now, listen to me. You're not going to languish in some soulless hotel room. I have a spare bedroom, as you know, ever since poor Arthur passed. It's not fancy, but it's clean, and the kettle is always on. You'll come and stay with me, at least for a little while, until you get yourself sorted. Her offer, so unexpected, so generous, brought tears to my eyes. Oh, Margaret, I whispered, I couldn't possibly impose. Fiddlesticks, she retorted. It's not an imposition, it's an invitation. And frankly, Eleanor, I could do with the company. These four walls get a bit tiresome with only the cat for conversation, and he's a dreadful gossip. And so, a few days later, I found myself installed in Margaret's cozy, slightly cluttered spare room, surrounded by chintz cushions, shelves overflowing with books, and the comforting aroma of lavender and old paper. It was a world away from Michael and Jessica's sterile, modern mausoleum, and it felt, surprisingly, like coming home. My absence from Michael and Jessica's household did not, it seemed, go unnoticed for long. Or rather, the absence of my services did not go unnoticed. The first call came from Michael 3 days after my departure. His voice was tight, annoyed. Mom? Where are you? Jessica said you just left. Without a word. The kids are asking for you. And frankly, this place is a mess. Oh, I'm quite well, Michael, thank you for asking, I replied, my voice cool, polite. Margaret, who was sitting opposite me, sharing a pot of tea and a plate of her excellent ginger biscuits, gave me a discreet thumbs up. As for where I am, I continued, I am taking a much-needed rest. I believe you yourself pointed out that my presence was a source of considerable stress in your household. I merely decided to alleviate that stress for you. There was a stunned silence on the other end. But who's going to look after the kids? Who's going to make dinner? Jessica has a major brand collaboration deadline this week. I imagine, Michael, I said, my voice like silk, that you and Jessica, being the capable, modern, career-driven individuals you are, will manage perfectly well. Perhaps Jessica could even curate a visually appealing and nutritionally balanced takeout menu for her followers. I'm sure it would be an inspiration to them all. I could almost hear his teeth grinding. This isn't funny, Mom. No, Michael, I agreed. It isn't. It hasn't been funny for a very long time. Now, if you'll excuse me, Margaret and I are about to embark on a thrilling game of Scrabble. Do give my love to the children. And tell Jessica I hope her collaboration is a resounding success. I hung up, a small, satisfied smile playing on my lips. Margaret was beaming. Eleanor, my dear, she said, refilling my teacup, I do believe you've rediscovered your backbone. And it is a truly magnificent sight to behold. The game, it seemed, had just begun. And for the first time in 3 long years, I felt like I might actually be enjoying it. The calls from Michael became a regular occurrence, each one a little more desperate, a little more frayed around the edges, than the last. The initial annoyance had morphed into a bewildered frustration, then a dawning, panicked realization that his well-ordered life, or rather, the life I had so seamlessly ordered for him, was rapidly unraveling. Mom, the laundry is piling up to the ceiling, he'd lamented one evening, his voice tight with exasperation. Jessica tried to do a load, but she put a red sock in with the whites, and now all of Leo's school shirts are pink. Pink, Mom. He's refusing to wear them. I'd made sympathetic clucking noises. Oh dear, Michael. That is a predicament. Perhaps a valuable learning experience for Jessica in the complex art of domestic science? Or maybe Leo could start a new trend? Pink is a very versatile color, I believe. Another time, it was the groceries. We've run out of everything, Mom. Jessica ordered online, but they delivered parsnips instead of carrots, and she has no idea what to do with a parsnip. The kids are threatening to mutiny if they have to eat cereal for dinner again. Parsnips are lovely roasted, Michael, I'd offered helpfully. With a little honey and thyme. There are numerous excellent recipes online, I'm sure. Perhaps Jessica could even do a blog post about embracing unexpected vegetables? Very on brand, I would think. His frustrated sigh was almost audible through the phone lines. Jessica, for her part, remained conspicuously silent, at least directly to me. Her communication came via Michael, relayed in tones of increasing bewilderment. Jessica says she can't find the good silver. She needs it for a photo shoot for that artisanal cutlery brand. The good silver, my mother's, which I had prudently removed from their house along with my other essential belongings. Jessica says Mia cried all morning because her favorite princess dress wasn't clean for dress-up day at nursery. A dress I had hand-washed and ironed countless times. It was, I had to admit, a source of quiet, if somewhat guilty, satisfaction to hear of their domestic struggles. Not because I wished them ill, exactly, but because it was a stark, undeniable validation of the role I had played, the role they had so casually, so cruelly, dismissed. They were finally experiencing, firsthand, the relentless, invisible labor that had underpinned their comfortable, curated lives. And they were, it seemed, singularly ill-equipped to manage it. Margaret, my steadfast companion through this unfolding drama, was a source of unwavering support and deliciously wry commentary. "It sounds like the chickens are well and truly coming home to roost, Eleanor," she'd chuckle, after I'd relayed Michael's latest tale of woe. And frankly, my dear, it couldn't happen to a more deserving couple. During this time I began to tentatively explore my own options. Margaret's spare room, while comfortable and welcoming, was not a long-term solution. I was, after all, a woman of independent, if modest, means. My old house was sold, yes, but the proceeds, after my initial loan to Michael and Jessica for their down payment, a loan I now considered a very bad, and entirely unrecoverable, investment, were still sitting in my account, a small but respectable sum. I started looking at small apartments, perhaps in a quiet retirement community, a place where I could have my own space, my own routine, without the obligations or the emotional drain of living with family. The thought was both daunting and exhilarating. To be truly independent again, after so many years of caregiving, first for Harold, then, in a very different way, for Michael and his family, it was a prospect I hadn't dared to entertain for a very long time. One afternoon, Michael called, his voice unusually subdued. "Mom," he said, Jessica wants to talk to you." This was unexpected. Jessica, the queen of curated perfection, the mistress of passive aggression, wanting to speak to me directly? "Oh?" I said, my voice carefully neutral. "What about, Michael?" "Just talk," he said. She's finding things a bit much. The house, the kids, her work. It's all a bit overwhelming." I waited. "She was wondering," he continued, his voice hesitant, if maybe you'd consider coming back. Just for a little while. Just to help us get back on our feet. We'd make it worth your while, Mom. We could work something out." The offer, so predictable, so utterly lacking in any genuine understanding or remorse, was almost laughable. They weren't offering an apology, they were offering a business proposition. They didn't want their mother back, they wanted their unpaid housekeeper, their built-in childcare, their domestic stress absorber. "Michael," I said, my voice calm, firm, "I appreciate the offer. But my plans have changed. I am no longer available to be the solution to your self-inflicted problems." "But Mom." "No, Michael," I interrupted, my voice gentle but unyielding. "My answer is no. You and Jessica are adults. You have children. You have a home. It is time for you to learn to manage your own lives, without relying on me to pick up the pieces. It will be a valuable learning experience for you both. Perhaps you could even do a collaborative blog post about it, navigating domestic chaos, a modern couple's journey to self-sufficiency. I'm sure it would be very relatable." I heard a strangled sound on the other end, a sigh? A sob? It was hard to tell. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Michael," I said, "Margaret is about to trounce me at Scrabble for the third time this week, and I need to concentrate. Goodbye." I hung up the phone, a strange sense of lightness filling me. The power dynamic had shifted, irrevocably. And I, Eleanor, the supposedly stressed, judgmental, hovering old woman, was finally, gloriously, in control of my own narrative. The final act of this particular family drama played out not with a bang, but with a whimper, theirs, not mine. A few weeks after my definitive refusal to return to their chaotic household, a rather official-looking envelope arrived for me at Margaret's address. It was from a firm of solicitors I didn't recognize. My heart did a little flip of apprehension. Were they trying some legal maneuver, some desperate attempt to compel my return or, worse, to gain access to my remaining funds? Margaret, ever the pragmatist, slid it open with a stern frown. Inside, however, was not a legal threat but a proposal. A rather convoluted, jargon-filled document that, when deciphered by Margaret's expert eye, essentially amounted to this: Michael and Jessica were offering me a formal, caregiving contract. They proposed a monthly stipend, a surprisingly paltry sum, considering the scope of services they clearly expected, in exchange for my return to their home to resume my previous duties. The contract even had a clause about clearly defined hours of work and annual performance reviews, as if I were applying for a position as a domestic servant, which, I suppose, in their eyes, I was. Margaret read it aloud, her voice laced with a mixture of incredulity and amusement. "Annual performance reviews, Eleanor," she exclaimed, shaking her head. "Can you imagine? Mrs. Peterson, your stew-making skills are exemplary, but your dusting of the upper bookshelves has been somewhat subpar this quarter. We'll need to see improvement if you wish to retain your stipend." We both dissolved into gales of laughter, a helpless, healing laughter that seemed to wash away the last vestiges of my lingering hurt. The sheer, unadulterated cluelessness of it, the utter lack of self-awareness, was breathtaking. They still didn't get it. They still saw me not as a mother, a grandmother, a human being with her own needs and feelings, but as a function, a solution to their domestic inconveniences. My reply, drafted with Margaret's gleeful assistance, was a model of polite, unequivocal refusal. "Dear Michael and Jessica," I wrote. "Thank you for your recent proposal. After careful consideration, I must respectfully decline your offer of employment. My current circumstances are most satisfactory, and I find my time fully and pleasantly occupied. I do, however, wish you both the very best in navigating your future domestic arrangements. I am confident that with dedication and perhaps a few online tutorials, you will master the intricacies of laundry, meal preparation, and childcare in due course. Sincerely, Eleanor Peterson, your mother, and definitely not your employee." We sent it by registered mail, just for good measure. The silence that followed was profound, and this time, blessedly permanent. I heard, through the neighborhood grapevine, Mrs. Henderson from my old street, naturally, still kept Margaret informed of all pertinent developments, that Michael and Jessica had been forced to hire actual paid help, a cleaner twice a week, and a part-time nanny for the children. It was, apparently, costing them a small fortune, and Jessica's brand collaborations were not quite as lucrative as she had led Michael, and her online followers, to believe. Their financial situation, already strained by their aspirational lifestyle, became, according to Mrs. Henderson's gleeful reports, rather precarious. I felt no triumph in this, only a distant, weary sadness for the choices they had made, for the priorities they had so spectacularly misjudged. My own life, in contrast, had blossomed. I found a lovely little two-bedroom apartment in a quiet, well-maintained retirement village called Willow Creek Meadows. It had a small balcony perfect for my potted herbs, a bright, sunny living room, and a community of friendly, active seniors. Margaret, true to her word, decided she rather liked the look of Willow Creek too, and moved into an apartment just down the hall a few months later. Our Scrabble games became a daily ritual. I reconnected with my love of gardening, volunteering at the community vegetable patch. I joined a local historical society, indulging my lifelong passion for local lore. I even, at Margaret's insistence, signed up for a beginner's watercolor class, discovering a surprising, if modest, talent for capturing the fleeting beauty of the flowers in our shared garden. My grandchildren, Leo and Mia, remained a quiet ache in my heart. I sent them birthday cards, Christmas gifts, small, impersonal tokens of a grandmother's enduring, if distant, love. I never heard back directly, but I hoped, I prayed, that one day, when they were older, they might understand. That they might seek out the story of the grandmother their parents had so effectively, yet so temporarily, managed to sideline. My son had said I was the reason for his stress. Perhaps I had been, in a way. I had been the stress of a guilty conscience, the stress of an unacknowledged debt, the stress of a love taken for granted. But I was no longer his stress. I was my own peace. And that, I discovered, was a far more rewarding, and infinitely more satisfying, role to play. The stew, I imagined, was still a challenge for them. But some lessons, I've learned, are best learned on an empty stomach. The ensuing years at Willow Creek Meadows were some of the most contented of my life. The peace I found there was not the stagnant peace of resignation, but the vibrant peace of a life reclaimed, a spirit rediscovered. Margaret and I became an inseparable duo, the Willow Creek Irregulars, as some of our more whimsical neighbors dubbed us. We explored local antique shops, attended community lectures, and engaged in spirited, if occasionally heated, debates about current events over endless cups of tea. My watercolors improved, and I even sold a few at a local charity art fair, the small thrill of seeing my work appreciated by strangers a surprising delight. The Eleanor Peterson Stress-Inducing Domestic Services Limited, as Margaret mischievously referred to my previous life, was well and truly shuttered. Of Michael and Jessica, I heard very little. The neighborhood grapevine, while still occasionally rustling with news from my old street, reported that their financial woes had continued. Jessica's influencer career, it seemed, had peaked and begun a slow, inexorable decline, her curated perfection perhaps proving unsustainable in the face of real-life struggles. Michael, I heard, had changed jobs twice, each move seemingly a step down the corporate ladder. There was a certain grim justice in it all, but I found I no longer took any satisfaction from their misfortunes. They had made their bed, they were now, quite literally, lying in it. My focus was on the present, on the small, everyday joys that now constituted my life. The scent of freshly baked bread from the village bakery, the laughter of my new friends during our weekly card games, the quiet satisfaction of tending my small balcony garden, the first tentative buds of spring on the cherry tree outside my window. These were the things that mattered now. One crisp autumn afternoon, about 5 years after my liberation, as Margaret called it, an unexpected letter arrived. It was addressed in a spidery, unfamiliar hand, the postmark from a town I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. It was from a woman who introduced herself as an old school friend of Jessica's. She wrote that she had recently reconnected with Jessica after many years, and had been concerned. Jessica, she wrote, was not doing well. The carefully constructed facade had crumbled. She was struggling, both financially and emotionally. Michael had become distant, embittered. The children, Leo and Mia, were caught in the middle, their home life strained and unhappy. The letter writer wasn't asking for money, or for my intervention. She simply felt, she wrote, that as Jessica's mother, I might want to know. I read the letter several times, a complex mixture of emotions swirling within me. Sadness, yes. A lingering, maternal ache for the daughter who had caused me so much pain, but who was, nonetheless, still my child. But also, a strange sense of detachment. Her struggles were hers, the consequences of choices she had made. I had my own life now, my own peace to protect. I showed the letter to Margaret. She read it, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said finally, handing it back to me. "What are you going to do, Eleanor?" I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer. "Nothing, Margaret," I said. "Absolutely nothing." It was not said with bitterness, or with a desire for revenge. It was said with the quiet conviction of a woman who had finally learned to prioritize her own well-being, who understood that some bridges, once burned, cannot, and perhaps should not, be rebuilt. My grandchildren, Leo and Mia, were another matter. The letter had stirred a dormant longing, a renewed concern for their welfare. They were innocents in all of this. I contacted my solicitor, the capable Ms. Albright's successor, and instructed her to make discreet inquiries about setting up a small, independent trust for their future educational needs, a trust that neither Michael nor Jessica could access or control. It was a small gesture, a grandmother's legacy of love offered from a distance, the only way I knew how. My life continued, peaceful, contented. I found joy in my friendships, in my hobbies, in the quiet rhythms of my days. The stress I had supposedly caused Michael was a distant memory, a footnote in a chapter of my life that was now well and truly closed. If I was the source of anyone's stress now, it was only Margaret's, when I consistently beat her at Scrabble with an obscure, high-scoring word. And that, I thought with a quiet smile, was a kind of stress we could both happily live with. The trust for Leo and Mia was established with a quiet efficiency that I had come to associate with good legal counsel. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to ensure that whatever paths they chose in life, their education would not be hampered by their parents' financial mismanagement or short-sightedness. It was a silent gift, a grandmother's provision made from afar, a small way of trying to mend a tear in the fabric of family that I knew I could not otherwise repair directly. I never heard from Michael or Jessica again, not directly. The occasional snippet of news would filter through via Margaret's remarkably resilient connections to my old neighborhood, tales of further financial strains, of moves to smaller, less desirable accommodations, of Jessica's increasingly desperate attempts to revive her flagging online persona. Each piece of news was met on my part with a fading echo of sadness, but no regret for the boundaries I had drawn, for the life I had reclaimed. My own life, in contrast, was rich in ways that had nothing to do with bank balances. My circle of friends at Willow Creek Meadows provided a warmth and camaraderie that had been missing for so long. We celebrated birthdays with genuine enthusiasm, commiserated over minor ailments with humorous empathy, and shared the quiet wisdom that comes with a lifetime of experience. My watercolors, surprisingly, began to attract a small following at local craft fairs, and the joy of creating something beautiful, something that resonated with others, was a quiet, unexpected gift in my later years. One spring morning, as I was tending the roses on my balcony, a new variety, a fragrant, apricot-colored bloom that reminded me, faintly, of the ones Harold and I had so lovingly cultivated, I received a small, hand-decorated card in the mail. The envelope was addressed in a childish, block-letter scrawl. My heart did a familiar, hopeful flutter. Inside, on a piece of construction paper adorned with glitter and slightly lopsided crayon drawings of flowers, were two names, Leo and Mia. Below them, in a neater, adult hand I didn't recognize, was a simple message: "Thank you for the books. We love them. Our teacher helped us write this." Books. I had, on a whim, through my solicitor, arranged for a small, anonymous gift of age-appropriate books to be sent to their school, earmarked for their respective classrooms, hoping that some of the joy of reading, a love Harold and I had shared and tried to instill in Michael, might find its way to them. It was a small gesture, a shot in the dark, and I had expected no acknowledgement. Yet here it was. A tangible connection, however fragile, however indirect. I held the card to my chest, tears pricking at my eyes. It wasn't a reconciliation, not by any means. But it was something. A whisper of hope. A reminder that love, in its myriad forms, can sometimes find a way, even through the densest thickets of hurt and disappointment. My son had once told me I was the reason for his stress. He had been wrong. I was not the source of his stress, I was, perhaps, the mirror reflecting his own failings, his own unacknowledged responsibilities. The stress he felt was the friction between the life he wanted and the life he was willing to work for, the life he was willing to build with integrity. I, on the other hand, had finally found my peace. A peace born not of a life without challenges, but of a life lived authentically, a life where my own worth was no longer negotiable, my own happiness no longer deferred. And as I looked out at the blooming garden beyond my balcony, the scent of roses sweet in the spring air, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my soul, that I had finally, truly, come home. The help, it turned out, had been within me all along. The final years of my life unfolded with a quiet grace that I cherished every day. The card from Leo and Mia was not followed by a sudden flurry of communication, nor did I expect it to be. It remained a precious, private memento, a small symbol of a connection that existed, however tenuously, across the chasm of their parents' making. My friendships with Margaret and my other companions at Willow Creek deepened, becoming the sturdy, reliable bedrock of my social and emotional life. We shared laughter, confidences, the comfortable silences of long-standing affection. We supported each other through the inevitable aches and pains of advancing age, through illnesses and losses, our shared experiences creating a bond stronger than many I had known within my own biological family. My watercolors continued to bring me joy, a quiet, meditative practice that filled my afternoons with color and light. I even took on a few small commissions, painting floral still lifes for friends, the modest income a pleasant supplement to my pension, allowing for small indulgences like an extra tin of Margaret's favorite Earl Grey tea or a new, vibrant set of paints. The legacy I was building was not one of grand pronouncements or dramatic gestures, but of quiet consistency, of living authentically according to my own values. The trust for Leo and Mia remained in place, a silent promise for their future. The bulk of my estate was still destined for the charities that had come to mean so much to me, organizations that supported those who, like me, had known the sting of being undervalued, of being dismissed. I found a quiet satisfaction in knowing that my life savings, accumulated through years of careful stewardship, would go on to do good in the world, to offer a helping hand to those in genuine need. Occasionally, a fleeting thought of Michael and Jessica would cross my mind, usually prompted by some offhand remark from Margaret about news from the old neighborhood. I felt no anger towards them anymore, only a distant, detached pity for the choices they had made, for the happiness they had so carelessly squandered. They had sought a life of curated perfection, of effortless entitlement, and in doing so, had lost sight of the simple, enduring truths of love, respect, and genuine human connection. Their stress, I realized, was the inevitable byproduct of a life lived without integrity, without gratitude. I, on the other hand, had found a different kind of richness, a wealth not measured in material possessions or social media followers, but in the quiet contentment of a life lived with purpose, in the warmth of true friendship, in the peace of a clear conscience. The son who had accused me of being the source of his stress had, in a profound and ironic way, inadvertently propelled me towards a life of profound, unshakable serenity. He had sought to offload his burdens onto me, but in refusing to carry them, I had found my own liberation. As my own strength began to wane, as the days grew shorter and my steps a little slower, I felt no fear, no regret. I had lived my life, I had made my choices, and I was at peace with the legacy I would leave behind. It was a legacy not of bitterness or revenge, but of resilience, of self-respect, and of the enduring power of kindness. And in the quiet of my sunlit apartment, surrounded by my books, my paintings, and the fragrant promise of the roses on my balcony, I knew that my story, though perhaps not the one I had once envisioned, had found its own true, and deeply satisfying, end. The stress was finally, truly, gone. Only peace remained.